Okay, the installation video for the 2011 to 14 MGW Race-Spec MT-82 is very similar to the shifter that is now standard that we're developing for the 2015. So you may see in the installation video that some of the steps actually refer to the shifter are on a 2015 vehicle. All the steps are identical at those stages, so don't be alarmed. Here are the tools you will need to install the Race-Spec MT-82 shifter on your Mustang. Starting over here, we have a small flat blade screwdriver. We have a ratcheting box wrench in 10mm size. We have a breaker bar. This is to remove the transmission cross member. We have a 1/4-inch drive ratchet. We have a variety of sockets here. We have a 7mm. We have a 1/2 inch. We have a 10mm, and the 10mm needs to be a deep well socket. We have a 15mm, and we have an 18mm. You're going to need at least 10 inches of reach, so we have two 8-inch extensions here, but if you have one 10 or 12, that's sufficient. We have a number 20 Torx wrench. This impact driver is optional, but it makes removing and raising up the cross member a lot easier. You need a couple of assortments of trim tools to remove the panels in the top of the vehicle. You need a hammer and a small punch. This punch needs to be between 1/8 of an inch and 5/32 of an inch. This is to remove the small roll pin in the OEM shifter shaft. And this extended reach 3/16 Allen key is provided in the MGW kit. Make sure your Mustang is on a level surface. Apply the parking brake. Make sure the vehicle is in neutral. Take off the factory shift knob. Pull up on the boot a little bit. Make sure it breaks free from the little indentions that are on the bottom side of the boot that goes into the top of the shifter shaft. Open the center glove box. Open your cup holder. You want to do a combination of reaching up with your left hand and pulling up on the lid of the cup holder, and with your right hand curling your fingers up underneath the console and just lift up. Then work yourself to the front, lifting up and popping the tabs carefully. Try not to break them. Get the boot clear from the shift knob shaft. Lift it up about this far, reach up underneath, and pop this switch just by pushing on this little tab, and it'll come right off. If you have the cup holder ambient lighting option, you'll also have to unhook that to get this to move to the side. You just want to wiggle this little connector there. It's on one of the threaded studs there. That just holds it in place. And then there's another spline connector there. Just pull that straight out like that. Move this out of the way. Lift up the back portion of the sound deadening material, and then lift up the sound pad from the factory. Make sure you remember which way it was oriented and set that aside. You will reuse this. Now you want to pull on the boot around the circumference and get it pulled up off of there, and then lift up there, and the boot should come off. And we will be reusing the dust boot as well, so put that to the side. With the vehicle in neutral, take your 3/8 socket and one of your extensions on your ratchet, and go ahead and remove 3 of the bolts. The one here in the passenger rear location, this bolt we will have to remove after we lower the back end of the shifter from underneath the car so that we can move it over. There's not enough room to get to it from here. It's actually underneath the console area. But you're going to want to remove this one, and the other one. Okay, now we're underneath the Mustang. We are on a lift, but you can also use jack stands. First thing we need to do under here is to remove the 6mm hex nuts on the rear support bracket. You're going to use your 10mm deep well socket and either a 16, 12, or 10 inch minimum extension on your ratchet. Okay, once you have removed both of the 6mm hex nuts, one on the left, one on the right side of it, You're going to grab the bushing bracket and pull down on the whole shifter assembly and slide it down off of the 2 threaded studs. On the passenger side, there may be a little panel nut that works like a spring nut to hold it in place. They do that for assembly purposes. You may need to reach up on the top side of the rear bracket and pull down on that as you pull down on the whole shifter area. Once we're done that, we'll pull this off of the rear boss there and pull out the rear OEM bushing bracket. Okay, we're going to take our 3/8 socket and we're going to remove these 3 bolts on the driver's side of the shifter that connected to the swing arm that's connected up in the front of the transmission. You will not reuse these bolts. You're going to want to hold the shifter in place with your right arm when you remove the 3rd screw, just so the bolt can come out straight and it doesn't jam. And then you just lay the shifter on the drive shaft. Okay, now we're back up inside the vehicle and we're going to get this last bolt here. You want to hold on to the shifter with your right arm while you unscrew this last screw. Pulling up on it, and when it comes out, the shifter should pop right out into your hand. There you go. Grab that bolt and then work the shifter up out. And there's the factory shifter. I want to take these little plastic pieces out, just pull them straight up. Set them aside. You have one there. And you can either take this one out or you actually can leave it in because the rod will come forward, but we'll go ahead and take it out as well just to get it out of the way so it doesn't fall up underneath the car. And you just want to lift up on the rod and you can pull it out, and then you want to kind of manipulate the rod so that it lays up underneath of, there we go, and just let it hang down, and then we're just going to work the factory shifter up out of the hole. And you'll see one of the bushings in the back stays on it, the box back in there. However, you want to reach down and grab a hold of your linkage rod, and you'll see that on the front of it, make sure you take this off. We've had a lot of people forget that front bushing. It's split, so it just pulls right off the front side of the cup on the rod. If you don't take this off, when you try to shift front to back, it's going to jam up against the shifter box and you won't engage the gear fully. So make sure you take that off. And you want to go ahead and just put your factory stuff back together. The one in the rear goes with the little flange facing the back. Stick the OEM bushing in there. And this one goes the opposite way facing the front. You can see when they're put together, that is your flange that the dust boot that's on the linkage rod snaps around. All right, the next step is going to be lowering the transmission. And this seems to be almost a deal breaker for some people. When I talk to them, they say, you know, they're really worried about doing this. It is very easy. You're not removing the transmission. You're not disconnecting the drive shaft or anything like that. All we're going to do is simply lower the transmission by removing this cross brace. As a matter of fact, we're lowering it and supporting it with this trans jack, but when we're actually installing the shifter, we're going to move this out of the way because we actually want to be able to hang on the drive shaft and pull it down in order to get access to the bolt that's way up here, which we'll show you later. But you simply have 15 millimeter hex nuts here, and you have an 18 millimeter hex head on these outer 4 bolts. So you just take the outer 4 bolts off first. And switch to your 15 millimeter socket. When you take these last 2 off, obviously put your hands here and hold it up. And just remember that to look at it, I'm not sure if the 15s have any markings on them to tell you what's, it does say right here, inline 4 manual, and you have a front. That goes to the front, follow the arrow, and obviously the hollow section goes up into this area first. So just make sure that you put it in the same way it came out. Once the cross member's out of the way, just lower the transmission. And again, we're just going to go ahead and lower it until it's actually not even touching, as you can see. And we're going to slide this out of the way. Just like that. So that we have actually ability to pull down on the transmission a little to gain access to the bolt up here. Okay, to install the Race-Spec, once the MT-82 shifter for an 11 to 14 is removed from the car, as in the regular Gen 1 and Gen 2 shifters, there's 2 more steps for the Race-Spec. That's removing this side swing arm and removing the linkage arm, because both of these are eliminated with the Race-Spec. So we take our 10mm ratcheting box wrench. We'll be up underneath the car with the transmission lowered to get to this bolt. That's the main reason why you have to lower the transmission, is to get to this one bolt. There's not a lot of clearance between the tunnel. So you have to lower it, and you may even have to actually pull down on the drive shaft to get this bolt out of here. Once that's out, the arm comes out. We will keep this bolt. We're going to reuse this bolt to mount the Race-Spec, so keep that. And then once that's out of the way, we can get to the 1/2-inch hex head for this bolt with our 1/2-inch socket. Just remove it. There's only about 3/8 of an inch of thread, and then it'll pull out. It's got a long smooth section with a point on it, and you'll see why. There's actually a cross hole there, and that's actually the drive pin to manipulate the transmission. Okay, once you get the factory OEM linkage arm out, we're going to need to swap this polyurethane bushing and this sponge spring from the OEM unit to the MGW unit, which is machined in the same way. You just take a small flat blade screwdriver and gently put it into the bottom and lift out the spring plunger, which is just a little piece of open cell foam, like that. And then you want to bring the flat blade screwdriver into the bottom and just pry up lightly around the edges. If you have a curved tip, like an auger bit, it works a little bit better, like a little miniature pry bar. But if you get it in, once you get it loose, you can probably grab it with your fingers. Just kind of wiggle it out like that. Take your time with this. You do not want to damage this, because this thing is not replaceable without buying a whole new shifter. So you don't want to do that. Once you get it out, you'll see we have a little notch and there's a little boss. That's just to orient where the hole is. Make sure you put it in the correct way. The hole is closer to one side. You have a very thin edge here. That's the outside. This part goes in first. So the larger distance goes in. So you just bring it in, line up that little half round boss in the MGW and slowly push it in. Don't force it till it seats all the way down. And then take the little piece of foam and push it all the way into the bottom. And obviously, if it lines up right, you should see a hole through the center of it, like that. And if it doesn't look like the hole's all the way through, you just take your fingers and push down a little bit more. And now you can see it's in there clearly. That's it. Okay, we're back over on the benchtop model again, just showing in more detail how to put this front linkage arm on. Put it a little more Loctite, which we provide, onto the threads, and you just push it in and line up the hole. As you push it in, you just feed it through. And again, make sure that you push down and make sure that that has started before you start putting the ratchet on there, and pull up on it and make sure that the threads are tight. If the bolt pulls out, then start again. Once you get it in a couple turns, then you can put your 1/2-inch socket on there. And you want to go ahead and tighten this completely tight, because you cannot access this bolt again once the front support arm is on. So this bolt at this time you want to tighten up completely. All right, once we've swapped over the little liner, we're going to take that same bolt that came out. It's got a little residual blue Loctite on it, but we provide a little packet of blue Loctite, so We're going to put a little bit more on there. And then you're going to slide this up onto that boss, up on the transmission, just like we showed on the bench mount. And you'll have to push it in a little bit against that little spring, which is that just piece of foam. Once you push it in, just push down on the pin, you'll feel it fall right in and line itself up. Now, this is very critical that you guys do this. When you're putting this in, screw it in by hand first while you're pushing down. It takes a little downward pressure to get that thread started. If you start using a socket and start turning that thing without getting it in there by hand a few turns, you could very easily risk cross-threading that bolt, and that would be a real problem. So just make sure you take your time, just wiggle it a little bit, and make sure that when you're turning it, you can actually see it going in, and you can see it by looking in on the bottom. You'll see the little pointed part of the bolt will protrude out of the bottom. Once you get it started, take your 1/2-inch ratchet or 1/2-inch socket and go ahead and tighten this up. It does have the blue Loctite, so you don't have to get crazy tight, just get snug with it. Okay, from inside the vehicle, we're going to take the billet box, the lower box, and just guide it right down in and lay it on the drive shaft carefully so we can gain access to it back from under the car. Okay, we're going to connect the linkage arm to the linkage rod now with the supplied 5/16 hex bolt. We're going to stick it in here and slide the rod up to the stop. Get this bolt in. Now, if you notice, there's no Loctite on this yet. We will put red Loctite on here, but all we're doing is putting this bolt in temporarily. You're just going to screw it in by hand a couple turns and then run it in just flush, but not tight at all with your 1/2-inch ratchet. Reason we're doing this and not putting the Loctite yet is once we get everything mounted, we're actually going to set the reverse lockout up here from up top on the car, get everything set where it's supposed to be, and then we're going to disconnect this and we're going to loosen these two bolts here up in the front on the front support arm and here so that you can push the shifter all the way up to get the boot on. And we're going to explain that later. The rubber dust boot is kind of a pain with it way down in the console like this. So right now we need to get everything set, tightened up. This not tight with the Loctite, but just snugged up, and tighten these up so that we can set the reverse lockout. And again, once we do that, we're going to loosen these two bolts. We're going to remove this bolt, slide the rod out so we can push the transmission all the way up to this underside of the console. Somebody will need to push it up and hold it from underneath the car while you put the boot on from inside the car. Makes it much easier, saves a lot of time. Okay, now we're going to put the front support arm on, and it's going to go through the little slot in the transmission casting, and then the other end will slide inside the slot on the MGW shifter. You have the two 10mm bolts. Put a generous amount of blue Loctite, which we provide. This bolt was already in your car in this location here. We source the other one from Ford Component Sales. It's the exact same bolt, and it will go in where the transmission shifter box mounts here. We'll get that in there, line that up. Now you want to bring these in and just bring them snug, but again, do not tighten them all the way. This is a 10mm ratcheting box wrench. Let's bring this one in. And again, just snug because you want to have a little bit of travel with it. And again, just have this one snug as well. Now what you want to do is, looking down here, you want to go ahead and reattach the cross member. You do not want to keep jacking this transmission all the way up until that bottoms out, because you might push it up too hard and put strain on the shifter. You just want to get it up just enough so that the studs go through the holes. Then with this held in place, you take your cross member, making sure to put the front arrow again towards the front of the car. Just bring it up and start the two center nuts first, just so it stays in place. Once you have the two center nuts just hand tight in place, take your large bolts, go ahead and get them started. And this is where you'll know if you need to raise the transmission up just a little bit more, but as you can see, I don't need to, because I can actually start these in by hand. And once you get those in place by hand, then you can go ahead and take the pressure off of the transmission. Okay, with the 15mm socket, draw up the 2 center nuts, then switch to the 18mm socket and draw up the outer bolt. Okay, now we're back up inside the vehicle. We're going to go ahead and mount the upper base in. The supply grease from MGW needs to be put inside the pivot cup and on the shaft, like that. And you go ahead and put a little bit inside that hole there. We're going to take the spring with the 2 caps, apply some grease to one end, put the cap on there, and then go ahead and lay it with the cap facing down inside that hole. Take a little more of the grease, put it on the small end of the upper cap, and put it on the top there. That way that cap doesn't fall off when you're trying to put the base on. And then just take the rest of the grease that's in the cup and put it inside the box. Fill it up. Go ahead and use all the grease you have. Okay, here's the pivot cup that came off the factory shifter. You want to snap it on the end of the MGW ball. Like that. Make sure it spins freely. And you want to have the shifter. Here's the reverse plate. That goes on the driver's side. You'll see underneath, you have a hole here. That's where the spring goes. So make sure the car's in neutral. We left it in neutral. Make sure that if you popped it accidentally out of gear, you put it back in neutral so that you can hold the thing straight up, because you need to guide the pivot cup and the hole onto the spring at the same time. And you'll feel it seat down in there. And you need to hold it down because of the spring. Take one of the 1/4-20 bolts with the patch on it. And we provide this long 3/16 Allen wrench so that you can reach the bolt without hitting the gold isolator. So while you're holding it in place, just get one, and don't tighten it all the way because you have to get them all 4 started. So just bring it down till it stops, and then back it off about a 1/2 turn. Then get all 4 of them started. And once you get them all started, go back and tighten them all up. And this is when you're going to want to do the next step, which is setting the reverse lockout and setting your 1 to 2. We have a detailed video that specifically talks about doing that. So we'll have you review that video and then come back and finish the install. Okay, we're going to show a little more detail in how to adjust this reverse lockout pin, because we're still getting a little bit of confusion and people are struggling with it. So out here on the desk, it's probably a lot easier to show. As you can see right here, we have a nylon lock nut that locks this reverse lockout pin. Basically, the way this works is when you move this thing over and it touches that plate, it stops it, and should stop it right in the middle of the 1 to 2 gate. If this pin is sticking out too far, you won't be able to get to first gear and you won't be able to push forward. But also, if it's going in too far that way, you will actually go past the gate to first and second and go into that dead man area between 1 and reverse. So both are just as bad. You're going to get locked out either way. We've had a lot of guys that said, well, I'm just going to loosen it and turn this all the way in. That way it never contacts and I don't have to worry about it. That's very bad, because you're going to go past first gear and you're actually going to get locked out. So this is the best way to do this. You take a 1/2 inch socket, you break the nut loose here, and you get it way loose. And you actually turn this, and I have a little Allen wrench. You can see there's a cross hole in the pin. Turn it all the way out. Deliberately turn it out like this. And as you can see, well, that's still letting it go. No, that's actually still 3rd gear. So that's what we want. You cannot get it into 1st gear, okay? So we're going to turn it in just a little bit. You can see I can't get it into first gear. Keep turning it, just about a half a turn at a time, and it's starting to now. The trick to it is you want to just let it go in. See there, now it'll let me go into first gear. So once you get it to go in, you just want to go about a quarter of a turn more, and that's it, right about there. Now it's obviously also very important to hold it in place. Don't pull the Allen wrench out and then go turning that, because you're going to turn the whole pin, and then it's going to be out of adjustment again. So putting the Allen wrench in the hole, hold it in place, tighten it up. And now you want to check. And you want to push really hard against that pin, and then you also just want to put it very lightly and go it in. Because if you push hard, if you're right on the edge and you push hard and it won't go in, you're going to do that when you power shift. So you push hard, make sure it goes in 1 to 2, just like that, and then you do it very lightly. Make sure it goes into 1 to 2. And then lastly, make sure it goes into reverse. That's it.
We have a little trick. It's a little alternative step. It takes a little bit more time, but it makes it a little easier to get this boot on. Basically what you'll do, if the boot is fighting you and you can't get it on, just get down underneath the car and you just want to loosen both of these bolts. And then you want to shift the car into 4th gear up top, and then come down below and you want to take this bolt out, take it out completely. It shouldn't be tight at this point anyway because you haven't tightened it completely up. But if you did, go ahead and take it out completely. Leaving these bolts in place, you just loosen them up to let it slide. Do not remove those 2 bolts. Just going to take this bolt completely out. And then you'll slide the shaft forward, and that should be enough to get it out. There's just enough clearance to get it to slide out. Then what you can do is you can actually slide this thing all the way up, and if you imagine the underside of the car is here, you can have somebody underneath the car actually hold it up. This will all be well up inside the cabin now, above the console. Makes it 10 times easier to get the boot on. Once you get the boot on, lubricate the outside edges of the boot right here. And then when it's on, it'll slide down and you can fit the outside edge. Then when you get it back down, you just push the shaft back up to 3rd gear and then line it up and then just wiggle it back in to neutral. Well, actually back to 4th, and that hole will line back up. You can put the bolt back in and then tighten these 2 bolts back up. So what we need to do is we need to flip over this back side and we need to coat this back surface here to make it slippery. Because when we install this shifter onto, or this boot onto the shifter, we're actually going to push it right through the oval cutout and it'll slide easier. If you don't lubricate this surface, what'll happen is you'll pull this right back off the shifter when you're trying to push it down. You have 3 options here. We actually have some rubber safe grease. This is EPDM, so you need to make sure you use a grease that will not attack the rubber. So you can use that and you can lubricate it. You can also use just general hand soap, dish soap from your kitchen, because it's harmless for the rubber, and you just apply it there. Don't dilute it, actually use it full strength dish soap and just coat the surface. Or lastly, you can actually use a silicone-based tire dressing, and we're going to use that on a little paper towel here. Just put a generous amount on there, and what you want to do is you just want to put it all over the outside of this thing, just like that. Put a generous amount on there so when you feel it with your finger, it's very slick like that. And then you actually want to put a little bit inside the hole like that. And then even turning it around, we'll get a little bit more on here. You also want to go ahead and put some, and if you lift up this little lip here, we want to get some all the way around that inside lip. That'll be for later when you go to pull it back up into the console after everything's done. You'll lift this thing and you pull it back up, because this little split here is actually how it seals the tunnel. There's a thin piece of sheet metal and you actually just pull it up just on this part just to get this lip up. This will remain on the underside of the vehicle, the big larger lip. Just a note also for reference, when you're installing this shift boot, you have an arrow here and here. They are designed to face the rear of the vehicle and the front of the vehicle. Don't have it turned sideways like that, because obviously the oval will not go into the shape of the trans cutout and it won't seal properly.
So you want to have that set just like that with the two arrows facing the front and rear. It is symmetrical that way, so it doesn't matter which way you do that. Okay, we're inside the car here, and as we said, a good little trick is just to loosen up the front support, disconnect the linkage rod real quick. That's once you have set the reverse lockout. You get all that set, and then you go back and you just disconnect the linkage rod and loosen up the two bolts for the front support, and then you can pivot the thing all the way up here, and we have somebody underneath the car just holding it up against the underside of the tunnel. Makes this boot install a lot easier here. There we go. And then again, like we showed in the video, we're going to lubricate this underside because we're actually going to have to, we're going to want to push this down around. You can go ahead and lower it a little bit in the car. And then we're going to push it all the way down inside there, just like that. And then when we get done and push everything back up, all you'll have to do is just like that, just pull just the top lip up. And it'll seal it just perfectly like that. But for now, just go ahead and tuck everything in there. That way you can push the shifter all the way down to get everything mounted again. Okay, this is just a recap. We're just wanting to be very clear on the steps and the procedures and the order in which you do things to make sure you don't backtrack and waste a lot of time. This is the assembly without the upper assembly mounted underneath the vehicle. What you're going to want to do is when you put this bolt in here, you do not put any Loctite on it. You just put it in snug for now. Get everything lined up, tighten everything up on all three places. Then you'll get up on top of the vehicle, inside the vehicle, and you'll go ahead and mount. We'll go ahead and put the spring in there. You'll mount the upper shifter while everything's locked into place. And the reason why you need to have everything tight and level to start with is that we're going to go ahead and set the reverse lockout at this point. So you put this in and you assemble the shifter. And I'll just put one bolt in for now just to tighten it up, just to show you what we're doing. Okay, so the shifter's in place and everything's tight. You do not have the rear bracket on. I want to stress that. Do not put the rear bracket. You really don't even need it. The thing is solid anyway. So you put everything on, you get up inside the vehicle, you tighten this down, have the springs, you grease everything, and then you're going to set your reverse lockout plate. Get all that set. And this is after the transmission is pulled back up. You need to make sure that's very important. We lowered everything to get this bolt started, and that bolt started. You raise the transmission all the way back up, bolt the transmission cross member back in, but you do not get on it tight. You just get it snug up against the underside of the vehicle. Then you come up here and you're going to loosen this bolt just about a turn. Loosen this bolt, and again, this is with the transmission up in place after you've done the reverse lockout. You loosen those two, and you have somebody up inside the car actually put the car into fourth gear. Okay, very important. Do not skip that step. Put the car into fourth gear. What that's going to do is it's going to push the front linkage arm all the way up against the transmission. Then you're going to take your 1/2-inch socket and you're going to remove this bolt. Remember, there was no red Loctite on this bolt at this step. We just put it in there for alignment purposes. So we remove this bolt, and you may be able to slide it from underneath the vehicle, but most likely you're going to need, because the boot's going to be on it, remember. So, well, at this point the boot won't be on it yet, so you can actually probably wiggle it out of here. But if you can't, just have somebody up top pull the thing, and if it moves the linkage arm, put it back into fourth gear and try to get it out. There we go. So now it's out, and there's just enough clearance to get it out. So what's going to happen is, when you get it up here, you can slide that forward. Now the underside of the vehicle is going to be about to this level. Getting that boot in there is a real pain. What you do is you have somebody underneath the vehicle, push it up against the underside of the vehicle hard. This will pull all this stuff inside the cockpit of the vehicle. Getting that rubber boot around that groove will be very easy. And as we explained, you'll lubricate the outside of the boot. So once it's in, then you just push it down back into the underside of the vehicle and let the boot actually fall inside the oval cutout. Once you get that done,
you actually want to make sure that the vehicle, have somebody up inside the vehicle, pull it forward as far as it'll go, and then you will guide it down inside, and you look down inside there. Once you get it there, tell that person to just kind of wiggle it back in. It'll get it back into place, and then you can put your bolt back in. And at this point, you want to go ahead and apply the red Loctite and get this bolt in there. Again, don't get it all the way snug. You just want to get started in there. And then what you're going to want to do at this point is you're going to lower the transmission again so that you can put the rear gold bracket on the car, then raise everything back up, and then tighten all of these back up after everything's done. Okay, we've got the transmission support jack back in place, and we're turning it slowly, lifting the transmission back up into place. And while we do, you just take and line up the holes and just hold it there while it's going up, and make sure that these holes go right up around the studs and you don't jam the studs. And then you have to lower the transmission and start over. So just bring it up very slowly, and then keep stopping while you check to make sure that they're in place. A little bit more. Go, and once you have them in place, you can go ahead and bring the transmission up. There we go. And if you bring it up enough, you don't want to jam it up against it, but see, now it's up enough where we can just let it sit there. Now what you want to do is, looking down here, you want to go ahead and reattach the cross member. You do not want to keep jacking this transmission all the way up until that bottoms out, because you might push it up too hard and put strain on the shifter. You just want to get it up just enough so that the studs go through the holes. Then with this held in place, you take your cross member, making sure to put the front arrow again towards the front of the car. Just bring it up and start the two center nuts first, just so it stays in place. Once you have the two center nuts just hand tight in place, take your large bolts, go ahead and get them started. And this is where you'll know if you need to raise the transmission up just a little bit more, but as you can see, I don't need to, because I can actually start these in by hand. And once you get those in place by hand, then you can go ahead and take the pressure off of the transmission and get the jack stand out of the way. Okay, with the 15mm socket, draw up the two center nuts, then switch to the 18mm socket and draw up the outer bolt. And we recommend checking all the bolts with just a little breaker bar and just putting a little bit of pressure on there, making sure that they're tight. Go back and do the same with the 15mm socket in the center. And the first thing you want to do is take the two hex nuts that you took off of the OEM unit and put them on first. Okay, we're going to use our 10mm deep well socket again. And we're going to go ahead and bring these up and just get them snug. Okay, once we have determined that the boot is seated correctly, we're going to go ahead and just tighten these two 6mm nuts on the rear bushing bracket a little bit more. And we're only going to get, you know, snug tight. We're not going to go crazy with it, wrist pressure. And then we're going to take the MGW supplied 6mm nylon lock nuts, and we're just going to put them on top of those nuts and tighten them up against them. That'll just keep those nuts from vibrating loose while the car is in motion. One thing to keep in mind when you're tightening the nylon lock nuts is do not let the deep well socket go around both nuts at the same time, because you'll jam the one that's already snug too tight and you may strip it. Back it off a little bit and make sure that you're only turning the nylon lock nut, because you could easily get them both lined up with the flats and go over both of them, and it'll feel like it's tight, but you're actually only tightening one of them.
The final thing to do is to go ahead and install the under the car heat shielding material. You'll have 3 of these heat pads. You take the first one, peel off the backing. What you're going to want to do is you're going to curl it like an upside down U shape. And you're going to want to come up into the side, curl it all the way so it's touching. And you want to bring it all the way up inside and let the top part of the U touch the rubber boot. And then push it in and actually seal all the way around so it comes down about halfway down the box and it seals all the way around the rubber boot and attaches to the underneath of the center console or the tunnel, just like that. You do the same thing for the other side. Okay, once you get the 2 on the driver and the passenger side like that, take the third one, peel off the backing. You want to slide it up over the drive shaft with the adhesive facing up and just eyeball the center of the box like that and press it against the bottom of it and then curl the 2 sides around like that. And you do not want to press the ends up against it. You actually just want to leave them floating like that. They form a barrier like that. Just press the sides and the bottom like that. Okay, everything's pulled back up down below. Everything's tightened up. We've got the rear bracket on there. We've got everything all buttoned up. So now we're just going to come into the top and put the console back on. First thing we want to do is we want to carefully, do not pull hard, because you don't want to pull this boot after all the trouble you went through getting it on that lip. You just want to pull it up lightly around the outside, just enough to get this lip. And remember, you only want the first lip to come up, not the second wide lip. That stays on the bottom. So there we go. And it'll pull up and pull that little corner up. Just kind of pull on a little bit. Remember, arrows front to back. And then you push this down. You want this thing to be just like its natural shape. It actually should be dished in like this. So the outside should be up, and then it should go down in, and then that should push in, and you want it about maybe 1/4 to 3/8 of an inch from the top. You don't want it pulled up like that. That's not going to seal properly. You actually push it down, you can actually hear the vacuum seal. Just like that. Okay, we're ready to go ahead and put everything on top of the shifter and get the center console put back in place. Here's the MGW supplied sound plate. It will go on first. It has 2 slits for the rear of the car that go over the 2 studs. So you work the oval around, push that down into there, get that down in there, and make sure you push this thing flat so that it keeps out the noise and the heat as good as it can. Okay, then you have the OEM one, and it goes in the same way it came off. And you work the 2 holes through there as well, push that up into there. And then you take the rear part of the blanket and you work it through there, and you have this little plastic fastener, and it pushes down on top of that stud. And then on this side, you have this little fastener here that pushes down on this stud, holds this wire in place. And then you have this piece that goes inside this hole. Okay, and this is your switch for your center console. Take your center console and plug it in. And always pop the trunk just to make sure it's got a good connection. And then work the 2 pins. You see the blue tabs there in there. Now before you push down, make sure that you put the boot through here like that so it doesn't tear the boot. Snap it together, close the console. And then because this is a base interior boot, which has the large opening for the stock knob, if you decide to use an aftermarket knob, we provide this adapter piece that goes inside there, fills that hole nicely. So that looks really good. We're going to opt to use our MGW gripper knob. Comes with a GT, Pony, Boss 302, or the gear shift pattern. Go ahead and screw it on. Screw it all the way down, and you want to actually compress that rubber piece just a little bit, not too much, just so it's snug so it doesn't vibrate. Orient the logo. Then we're going to take our 1/8" Allen wrench that's provided with the gripper knob, and there's a small set screw at 12 o'clock, and you just want to tighten it up very nicely, keep it from rotating. Okay, once you're done, just want to check the gears. Again, 1 to 2 should be nice and smooth. If it still feels like it's hanging up, you may have to go back, push that boot down, and adjust that reverse lockout plate. But that's why it's very important that you do that before you button everything up. Makes it a lot less hassle. Shifter operates in reverse the same way the factory one does, with the exception of an option that the factory doesn't have. Now you can obviously just push straight down, over, and up to engage reverse, just like factory. But we have a better idea, and that is to push it over, just straight over to the left, and then you can actually just roll your wrist, because our reverse lockout plate actually has a ramp instead of a straight slot. So you can just push it over and just roll your wrist down, and it goes right into it. That way there's no question that you popped into reverse. And you can see with our heavy springs, it pops out of reverse very quickly. A lot of competitor shifters, people are complaining about them getting hung up in reverse. Doesn't happen on ours. Another method that you want to make sure you use that is not the same as the OEM, you use that. Hear that little clicking? That is that hardened plate and pin. Goes right into first gear. When you're ready to load up into a second gear shift, you want to actually push that thing up against that plate and use it as a guide. That way you don't accidentally go into fourth gear, because the springs on ours are much stronger than the OEM. So you just lightly do it, pull straight back, and go right into second gear. Like that. Second to third, let the shifter do all the work. Do not try to force it over into third. You'll end up overshooting third and hit the wall between 3 and 5. Just push with the back of the butt of your palm, straight up, goes right into third for you. Back to fifth. Even fifth gear, you do not need to dogleg it. You just push straight away from you, it goes right into fifth. Fifth to fourth, just grab the knob. Do not try to manipulate it. Straight back, the springs snap it right into fourth gear for you. Okay, that concludes the 2014 revision of the MGW MT-82 shifter. If you have any questions, please call us. Our phone number is listed on the website. Our website is mgwltd.com.